Princess Anne has broken her silence after decades of restraint, and the truth is devastating. In a shocking confrontation, she exposed Camilla's dark secrets, hidden deals, and the manipulation that has haunted the monarchy for years. Her words, "Enough is enough," have left the royal family trembling. The Balmoral Showdown. Anne breaks her silence. At Balmoral, what was meant to be a quiet retreat turned into a storm. Behind the grey stone walls of the Scottish estate, Princess Anne, the most disciplined, guarded, and loyal of the royals, finally broke her silence. For years she had endured. For years she had swallowed her words. But that night, she stood up in front of Charles, Camilla, and a ring of senior aides and said it with icy clarity. Enough is enough. Her voice wasn't raised, but it cut through the room like steel. Those present described the silence that followed as unbearable. For decades, Anne had been the one constant: duty without complaint, service without self-promotion, loyalty without question. But now, her patience had shattered. She spoke of favoritism, of the quiet manipulation that had become routine within the palace. She accused Camilla of eroding trust from within, of bending Charles to her will, and of silencing voices that didn't align with her influence. For the first time, Anne gave her anger words, and in doing so, she broke a code that had kept the royal family's inner fractures hidden. Those in the room later whispered that her words struck Charles hardest. She told him he had allowed his marriage to become a weapon inside the monarchy, a tool that divided rather than united. "You've let her shape the crown in her image," Anne said sharply, "and it's rotting us from the inside." Camilla sat in silence, her expression unreadable. But Anne did not hesitate. She laid out the truth that everyone else had tiptoed around. Years of compromises, secrets, and bargains made to shield Camilla had left scars on the family and the institution. To Anne, this was not love. This was manipulation disguised as loyalty. The Balmoral Showdown was not loud, not theatrical. It was something much sharper. The release of a truth no one else had dared to say aloud. Anne's words cracked the walls of silence that had protected Camilla for years. And as aides shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the weight of what had just been said became impossible to ignore. For Charles, it was a rebuke from the one sibling he had always counted on for unshakable support. For Camilla, it was a warning that her crown was not built on love, but on reluctance and compromise. And for Anne, it was liberation. The words she had carried for decades were finally spoken. What followed would not stay within the stone walls of Balmoral. The shockwaves rippled outward, because what Anne had said could no longer be unsaid. The silence had cracked, and the monarchy would never feel the same again. Queen Elizabeth's secret doubts. About Camilla. Princess Anne's words at Balmoral carried more than personal anger. They carried history. She reminded everyone of the late Queen Elizabeth's private doubts about Camilla, doubts that had never been spoken publicly but were impossible to ignore behind palace doors. Anne revealed that while the Queen had given her official blessing during the Platinum Jubilee, privately, she was deeply conflicted. In one of their final conversations, Elizabeth reportedly described Camilla as a reluctant compromise, not a rightful choice. She accepted her for Charles's sake, for the sake of avoiding more scandal, but she never saw her as the true future of the monarchy. The Queen's heart, Anne said, was with Catherine. To her, Kate represented dignity, loyalty, and a rare ability to carry the weight of the crown without scandal. Elizabeth reportedly called her the face of continuity, a woman who understood service in its purest form. By contrast, she saw Camilla as baggage, accepted out of necessity, not admiration. Anne's revelation was chilling. It suggested that the crown Camilla now wears was built not on approval, but on pressure. Elizabeth had been forced by politics, by Charles's insistence, and by the constant shadow of scandal to give in. The queen, who had ruled for 70 years, who rarely bent to public demand, had bent in her final years not because she wanted Camilla crowned, but because she felt she had no choice. Anne made it clear she believes her mother's legacy has been twisted. The Platinum Jubilee blessing, once seen as the Queen's wholehearted approval, was in fact a reluctant surrender. Elizabeth never wanted Camilla to wear the crown. She had been cornered. Her Majesty's private doubts, kept secret during her lifetime, now hang like a cloud over Camilla's reign. Anne described it as misuse of the Queen's name, the most sacred symbol of monarchy employed to justify something she had not truly supported. For those who heard Anne speak, it was a moment of reckoning. The monarchy's narrative of continuity had been exposed as false. Camilla's crown was not the product of destiny or tradition, but of compromise. And with Anne bringing her mother's doubts into the open, the message was clear. Camilla's reign is fragile, built on reluctance rather than right. And now that truth, long buried, had finally surfaced. The secret deal that bought Camilla the crown. When Princess Anne confronted Charles, she revealed a secret so heavy it shook the room. Camilla's crown had been purchased not by tradition, but by a deal. According to Anne, years before the Queen's death, Charles had struck a private bargain with his mother. The monarchy was under fire from the scandal of Prince Andrew, his friendships, his disgrace, his collapse in public life. The pressure was suffocating, and the Queen feared the damage could permanently scar the throne. Charles came forward with a promise. He would ensure Andrew was fully removed from public duty, exiled from the stage of royal life. In return, the Queen would give her quiet blessing for Camilla to one day be named Queen Consort. No signatures were ever written. No official record was kept. But Anne claimed the understanding was crystal clear. One crisis buried, another crown secured. For Anne, it was betrayal. She told Charles directly, "You traded one scandal for another. You sacrificed tradition to protect yourself." In her eyes, Andrew's disgrace had been exchanged for Camilla's legitimacy. And that was not a victory. It was a compromise that poisoned the future. Behind palace walls, the transaction still lingers like a ghost. Insiders whisper about it. Courtiers avoid the subject. But everyone knows the truth. Camilla's crown was not earned. It was arranged. And to Anne, that was unforgivable. The deal solved nothing. Andrew may have been pushed aside, but the monarchy's integrity had been sold in the process. Camilla's ascent was stained from the very beginning, tainted by bargains instead of duty. And Anne, who has spent her entire life living by the code of service, could no longer remain silent. Her accusation landed like thunder in the room. Charles, pale and shaken, didn't deny it. And for those watching, the silence said everything. The deal had been real. The crown on Camilla's head was the price of a scandal, and Anne was finished pretending it wasn't. Camilla's push for her own son's title. The breaking point came when Camilla allegedly pushed for her son, Tom Parker Bowles, to receive a royal title. For Anne, it was the final insult. Anne had tolerated much: the affairs, the compromises, the rewriting of history to fit Camilla into the crown. But this demand crossed a sacred line. Royal blood had always defined royal rank. To Anne, titles were not favors handed out through marriage, but inheritances of blood and history. When the request surfaced, Anne snapped. "Royal blood earns titles, not royal marriages," she declared. Those present said her words struck like a blade. Even Charles looked uneasy, caught between the ambitions of his wife and the fury of his sister. For Anne, this wasn't just overreach. It was unforgivable. It wasn't about Tom personally, it was about the principle. Allowing Camilla to extend the monarchy's privileges to her children would mean rewriting centuries of tradition, twisting the institution into something unrecognizable. Anne made it clear: the monarchy was not Camilla's to reshape. She accused her of exploiting her position, pushing boundaries that no consort had ever dared to cross. It wasn't love or duty. It was power, raw, personal, and self-serving. The tension in the room was electric. Aides shifted nervously, knowing they were witnessing a clash that touched the very soul of the monarchy. Anne's fury was not just about titles, but about what those titles represented: legitimacy, blood, continuity. To bend those rules for Camilla's son would be to bend the monarchy itself. Even Charles seemed paralyzed. His loyalty to Camilla collided head-on with his duty to uphold tradition. But Anne gave no ground. For her, the line was clear. And the moment Camilla tried to cross it, Anne's patience shattered. It was not a family disagreement. It was war over principle. And in Anne's eyes, Camilla had already gone too far. Who's really running the monarchy? When Anne finally confronted her brother, her sharpest words were not about the past, but about the present. She accused Camilla of quietly running the monarchy from behind closed doors. What was once seen as companionship between husband and wife had, in Anne's view, become control. She described how Charles no longer relied on lifelong courtiers or trusted advisors. One by one, they had been replaced by figures loyal to Camilla: communications directors, senior aides, and even private secretaries, all carefully chosen, all answering not to the king, but to the queen consort. To Anne, this was not partnership. This was manipulation. She warned Charles directly: "You've lost your judgment. You've let her rewrite our story." The words were as much a plea as an accusation. Those who overheard described Charles shrinking under the weight of her gaze, unable to deny that his wife's influence had become overwhelming. Whispers from insiders confirmed Anne's fears. Camilla had reportedly influenced major policy decisions, shaped press strategies, and even encouraged Charles to distance himself from certain members of his own family. "She's turning him against his own blood," one palace aide admitted. For Anne, it was unbearable. She had spent her life serving the crown with devotion, always prioritizing duty above self. But now, she watched her brother surrender his independence to the one woman their mother had never truly trusted. To Anne, it wasn't just weakness. It was betrayal of the monarchy's very core. Charles sat in silence, but his silence was its own answer. And for Anne, that silence confirmed her worst fear. The king was no longer in charge. The monarchy, once the fortress of tradition, was being quietly run by Camilla's hand. Diana's hidden letters, and Camilla's quiet erasure. Anne's voice hardened when she revealed what had been discovered in the archives, the letters written by Princess Diana. Her private words meant to document her struggles, her fears, and her views of Camilla. Those letters, Anne said, had not been preserved with dignity. They had been buried. Catalog numbers had been quietly altered. Access had been restricted even to senior royals. And worse, some correspondence had disappeared altogether. It was not archiving, it was erasure. The contents of the letters, according to Anne, spoke directly about Diana's isolation, her heartbreak, and her fears that Camilla would one day erase her place in history. They were not written for the press. They were written for her family, her children, and her legacy. But those words had been hidden, removed from sight, stripped from the official record. Anne accused Camilla directly of orchestrating the cover-up. She believed the Queen Consort had ensured that Diana's most damning words never reached the light of day. And by doing so, Camilla had cleansed her own public image, not through forgiveness, but through silencing. Anne's anger was cold and cutting. This is not history. This is theft. She accused Charles of allowing it, of protecting his wife at the cost of their late mother's memory. For Anne, it was the deepest betrayal of all. The monarchy had promised to preserve the truth. Instead, it had buried it, and the price of that silence was Diana's voice, silenced twice, once in life and once in death. For Anne, this was the moment everything crystallized. Camilla's rise had not just been controversial, it had been built on deception, on hidden letters, and on the deliberate removal of a woman whose presence still haunted the crown. And now, with those truths laid bare, Anne made it clear. Diana's story would not remain erased, not while she still had a voice to fight. The royal triangle that started it all. For Princess Anne, Camilla was never just her brother's wife. She was part of a wound that never healed. Long before Diana entered the royal picture, long before Charles's marriage collapsed under the weight of scandal, Anne herself had been drawn into the orbit of Andrew Parker Bowles. Their relationship in the early 1970s was discreet, shielded from cameras and gossip columns, but it was real. Anne cared for him deeply. Andrew, a polished soldier with charm and connections, was someone she trusted and admired. But Anne's personal happiness was rarely given priority in the machinery of monarchy. Their relationship had its limits, bound by rank, expectation, and the unspoken rules that shaped royal life. And then came Camilla. To outsiders, it may have looked like coincidence that she married Andrew while Anne was still close to him. But to Anne, it felt deliberate, like a carefully played move in a game she never agreed to play. Andrew married Camilla, leaving Anne behind. What should have been a private heartbreak soon turned into something larger, the beginning of a lifelong mistrust. Years later, the pattern repeated itself on a scale no one could ignore. This time, it wasn't just a man. It was her own brother, the Prince of Wales. His life, his marriage, his very crown would one day be consumed by Camilla's presence. First Andrew, then Charles, and eventually the monarchy itself. Anne once confided to a close friend words that would echo across decades. She takes what she shouldn't have. It was not bitterness for its own sake. It was an observation, a judgment born of memory. To Anne, Camilla was never just part of scandal. She was part of a pattern, stepping into places, roles, and affections that were never truly hers to claim. By the time Camilla was crowned Queen Consort, the personal wound had grown into a political one. Anne no longer saw her as simply her brother's partner. She saw her as a woman whose rise had cost too much. Not just Diana's dignity, not just her own chance at happiness, but the monarchy's very soul. Anne's fury was not driven by jealousy. It was shaped by memory. Each time Camilla appeared in public, standing confidently beside Charles, smiling for the cameras, Anne saw something different. She saw the echoes of broken families, the choices that had torn at the monarchy's foundations, the cracks that had been covered with polite words, but never repaired. It wasn't destiny, Anne believed. It wasn't fate or inevitability, as some tried to frame it. It was intrusion. This isn't destiny. It's intrusion, Anne reportedly told confidants, her words sharp and deliberate. And so, when Anne stood in Balmoral and finally declared, "Enough is enough," it was not an outburst born from a single moment. It was the culmination of 50 years of silence. 50 years of watching her own past entangled with Camilla's choices. 50 years of seeing her brother's crown reshaped not by tradition, but by compromise. For Anne, that confrontation was about more than Camilla's crown. It was about the shadow she had cast over her life, her family, and the monarchy itself for half a century. And in that moment, Anne's voice, steady, cold, unflinching, carried not just her own pain, but the weight of history she could no longer ignore. The curtsy that never came, a silent royal rebellion. When Charles married Camilla in 2005, the ceremony itself was modest compared to the grandeur of typical royal weddings. It was restrained, awkward, and still heavily clouded by controversy. For many in Britain and across the Commonwealth, it was not a celebration, but a compromise, a reminder of the scandal that had haunted the monarchy for decades. Yet, amid the careful staging and strained smiles, one moment overshadowed everything. Princess Anne did not curtsy. Royal protocol was clear. As the sister of the heir to the throne, Anne was expected to bow before his new wife. It was more than tradition. It was a symbol of acceptance. But the order had already been given by Queen Elizabeth herself. Anne will not be required to bow. What followed was a silent act of rebellion, sanctioned by the monarch. Anne stood tall, her posture unshakable, her eyes steady. As others around her lowered their heads in deference, she remained still. She made no movement, no gesture of recognition. To the cameras, it may have looked like nothing, but to those inside the family, it was thunder. Anne's refusal was not an impulsive slight. It was principle. She had lived her life defined by loyalty to the crown, devotion to duty, and unwavering service without complaint. But in her view, respect was something earned, not handed out by marriage or manipulated through public relations campaigns. By refusing to bow, Anne was sending a message. Camilla's place in the royal family would never be unconditional. Those closest to the Queen later explained her decision to exempt Anne. Elizabeth had long valued her daughter's loyalty, her honesty, and her refusal to play political games. Unlike others in the family, Anne had never sought the spotlight or personal power. By giving Anne the freedom to abstain, the Queen was quietly signaling something profound, that Camilla's acceptance into the family was conditional, not complete. As years passed and Camilla's influence grew, that moment at the wedding only became more symbolic. Each time the footage was revisited, the stillness of Anne seemed louder. It was a line drawn in silence, a quiet declaration that not all within the House of Windsor would ever embrace her. Anne herself reportedly told a confidant, "Respect is earned, not claimed." It was a philosophy she had carried throughout her life, one shaped by years of service in uniform, by endless engagements, and by her mother's example. To her, Camilla's power was not born of sacrifice or service, it was born of scandal. And that Anne could never overlook. The refusal to curtsy, small in gesture, became more powerful than any speech. It revealed cracks within the royal family's carefully constructed wall of unity. It showed that beneath the polished appearances, dissent still simmered, and it proved that even in silence, Anne's defiance could speak volumes. Observers have since looked back at that wedding day as a turning point, not because Camilla was welcomed, but because Anne made it clear she never truly was. That refusal has remained in history as a reminder that within the monarchy, not all crowns are respected equally. In a world where silence often protects, Anne's silence was resistance. And that resistance has never faded. It lingers, a reminder that behind the palace walls, some truths are too sharp to be hidden forever. Kate versus Camilla. The crown's quiet competition. While Camilla clawed her way into the royal spotlight, Kate Middleton rose on a different path, with grace, patience, and the admiration of the people. To the public, the contrast was undeniable. One seemed to be constantly justifying her place. The other embodied dignity without needing to fight for it. Behind palace doors, Queen Elizabeth saw the difference clearly. She once described Kate as the spirit of the monarchy, steady, loyal, and unshaken by scandal. Camilla, by contrast, she called its baggage. These were not just private words. They were judgments from the longest reigning monarch in history, a woman who knew character when she saw it. Camilla reportedly mocked Kate in private, dismissing her as a common girl playing dress-up. But that insult backfired. The public adored Catherine, her composure, her work, her devotion as a wife and mother. She symbolized stability, while Camilla's name still carried the scars of controversy. Princess Anne saw it too. She confided to close allies, "If there's a North Star in this institution, it's Catherine, not Camilla." Those words reflected what many already believed, that the future of the crown rested on Kate's shoulders, not on Camilla's. The rivalry wasn't loud or theatrical. It was quiet, a competition not of titles, but of respect. And as the years passed, the gap only widened. Camilla may wear the crown, but Kate has the people. And in the monarchy, sometimes the people's crown is heavier than gold. Will Anne go public and rewrite royal history? For decades, Princess Anne lived by one rule: loyalty meant silence. She had endured scandals, controversies, and betrayals without breaking her composure. But now, insiders say that silence may finally end. After Balmoral, Anne began to consider her options. A memoir, an interview, a documentary. Any platform that would allow her to speak the truth about Camilla, Charles, and the choices that had reshaped the monarchy. "She's thinking about it," one courtier admitted. Not for revenge, for truth. The possibility terrifies the palace. No one holds more credibility than Anne. She is known as the royal who never plays games, who never seeks headlines. If she speaks, the public will believe her. And if she exposes what she knows about Camilla's rise, Diana's erasure, and Charles's bargains, the monarchy's carefully guarded story could collapse. Charles fears it. Camilla fears it more. For years, both have relied on Anne's silence as a shield. If that silence breaks, the secrets buried in archives and whispers will flood into daylight. And once spoken, they can never be taken back. Anne herself has hinted at her reasoning. "Loyalty does not mean blindness," she reportedly told a trusted friend. To her, exposing the truth would not be betrayal. It would be service, not to the crown, but to history. If she speaks, the monarchy may never be the same. Camilla's crown, already fragile, could crumble under the weight of revelations, and Diana's voice, buried for decades, could finally be heard again through Anne's testimony. The question now is not if Anne can speak, it is if she will. And if she does, the monarchy faces the one storm it cannot silence: the voice of a sister who has had enough. The revelations cannot be buried. Anne has made it clear that Camilla's crown rests on scandal, compromise, and secrecy. If Anne takes her fight beyond palace walls, the monarchy faces a reckoning it cannot control. Her defiance echoes loudly, proof that even within royalty, truth will always rise.